Hello. Today I want to talk about Charles Brockden Brown's book, Wieland. Wieland was published in 1798. It was Charles Brockden Brown's first novel, and it's considered to be the first novel of American Gothic fiction. Charles Brockden Brown is sometimes called the father of the American novel. All that was really kind of surprising to me when I looked into Charles Brockden Brown. So I first found out about Wieland because I read an excerpt of it from American Gothic Tales, edited by Joyce Carol Oates. And this is a really great book. If you don't really think you're going to read Wieland, which you probably won't, and we'll get to that in a second, then this is a really great buy. It has an excerpt from chapter 19. Actually, not an excerpt. It has chapter 19 from Wieland in here, which is probably the most important chapter, I guess you could say. I definitely think it's the one that you're probably going to be most interested in reading. And I just read the first story. I just read Wieland. I'm like, well, what's this? It's not too long. So I'm going to tell you about that chapter. But here's the thing. Like I said, I don't think you're going to read this book. It's a novel written in 1798. The language is a little dated. It strikes a similar tone to something like from Hawthorne. Like, I find some similarities to the Scarlet Letter. I think a lot of people dislike the Scarlet Letter because they had to read it in like high school or something. So I'm not going to withhold very much, honestly, and that's going to start right about now, because you're not going to have any interest in this book unless I tell you why this book is so interesting. And to do that, I have to spoil it. If you like Gothic fiction of a much older variety, if you are used to reading Gothic fiction of a much older variety, then you might enjoy Wieland. If you cannot answer yes to both of those questions, then it's highly likely that you will either not read it at all or you won't finish it. This might be the impetus to get you to maybe answer yes to one of those questions at some point in your life. Maybe to the other one. Maybe at some point later in your life you might come back like me 20 years later after you hear about this book and read it, okay? I don't know. Also, I want to say, this is 2024 now, right? November 2024 when I'm recording this. Much earlier in the year, apparently a movie was made about Wieland. I remembered seeing a trailer, but I don't remember anything about it except kind of thinking, Wieland? Okay. And that's all I thought. I didn't know anything about the book. Didn't remember that was even the story that I had read or connect the dots at all. Like yesterday, I was like, I don't know, we'll just peek at the trailer for this. I think it's already out. I think I could watch it if I really wanted to watch the movie. And I watched the trailer, and I was kind of like, well, yeah, I can kind of see why I wasn't sure. It reminds me sort of like of what I can vaguely remember of like the Demi Moore Scarlet Letter movie, where they play up the sex a lot, and it just seems so weird for Wieland. It just seems like super weird to do that. It seemed like that. Also, in the trailer I watched, is this girl singing a song, this woman, whatever, singing a song, right? And she says Satan, but she pronounced Satan without a T, Satan. And that just drove me crazy. And I was like, I don't want to watch this trailer anymore. And I don't think I want to see this movie. And that's a stupid thing to say because it might be a good movie, but I don't know. That's just where I'm at. And honestly, I didn't want to really come on here and talk and have the movie in my head anyway. So I wasn't in a big hurry to watch it. Whether I'll watch it or not, I don't know. Just wanted to make that disclaimer that I've not seen the movie. I don't know if the movie's good or bad or whatever. The trailer just didn't do much for me. I'm going to give you a little bit about Brown now, I guess. And then I'll tell you about chapter 19 that I read, and then I'm just going to talk about the novel, and then talk about some themes and stuff, and just things I think were interesting or whatever. He was born in 1771, died in 1810 of tuberculosis. I think he was 39 or 40 then when he died. He was a Quaker. The Quakers, after the American Revolution, kind of lost a lot of favor in Pennsylvania because they were pacifists and they didn't really want to engage in fighting. I don't know if persecuted is quite the right word, but certainly the favor that they had once had was gone. Charles Brown's father actually went into debtor's prison, and Brown, who was about 8 or 11, I think, would go and spend the night with his father at prison to keep him company for about 8 months. While he was in debtor's prison. So he spent time with his father there. The family in general was on hard times, and Quakers were as well. Brown's family wanted him to become a lawyer. He was not super excited about it once he started doing it. He didn't like it because he didn't like that you could manipulate someone so easily with by like misleading them, which is what he sort of felt that lawyers did. Used the structure of language to sort of manipulate people in a certain way, sometimes for a good reason, but he didn't like that manipulation. He didn't like the sort of power that it gave you over people. He left being a lawyer and went and moved on to being a writer for a while before I think he eventually became an editor. At his time as an editor, he published feminist writings. He was very much behind the feminist movement. In fact, he published the feminist writings of Mary Wollstonecraft. That name could probably sound familiar to you because that is Mary Shelley Wollstonecraft's mother, the writer of Frankenstein. In fact, Mary Shelley read Wieland, and it was a source of inspiration for her writing of Frankenstein. Brown also I think he either wrote or was worked or did something for the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society to do like a history of slave trade in Pennsylvania. Just to be clear, this was to abolish slavery. And he also was one of the people that was mentioned to write a history of Pennsylvania prisons for an attempt to reform Pennsylvania prisons. So he was a very progressive person for the time period, very progressive. His novels were among the very first American novels to be translated into other European languages. And as I said before, he's sometimes called the father of the American novel. And Wieland is considered to be the first example of American Gothic fiction. Gothic novels in general were still sort of a pretty new thing. It was only 30, 40 years ago before this that The Castle on Otranto was published, which is the first Gothic novel. So this is not that long after even the first Gothic novel. The style of Wieland is not very much like Otranto. Otranto is very kind of over the top. I guess you could say it's like ticking all the little boxes that you would like have. Like, does a Gothic novel has this? Does it have spiderwebs and secret passages and ghosts and weird stuff? And it's got all that stuff. Right? Otranto totally has it. Wieland is not. Wieland is very sparse. Wieland is not like that at all. So it's a very different approach to Gothic. In sort of like my research for this video, one of the things that I ran across and watched and really enjoyed was a video by Esoterica, who is run by Dr. Justin Sledge. He made this really great video on like what is Gothic or something just like that. I'm going to link it. It's really great. Esoterica is a really neat channel if you like strange occult-ish stuff. So let's move into talking about Wieland. In chapter 19, this chapter begins with the character Wieland on trial. And he's making a statement, okay? And he talks about how he and his wife were at home and he had expected his sister to come and spend the night at their house because she was worried about some things. She was going to spend the night. The sister just hadn't shown up. So it was decided that Wieland, that's his last name. His first name is Theodore, but he's always just called Wieland, was going to go and look for his sister, whose name is Clara, and his wife, Catherine, was going to stay at home. So Wieland goes to Clara's house. It's like the path there is through the woods. It appears that it's empty, but he goes inside. This is probably the reason that you would show up to Wieland to see what's up, to read it. So Wieland is in the house, and he says in his testimony, "The darkness required some caution in descending the stair. I stretched my hand to seize the balustrade by which I might regulate my steps. How shall I describe the luster which, at that moment, burst upon my vision? I was dazzled. My organs were bereaved of their activity, my eyelids were half closed, and my hands withdrawn from the balustrade. A nameless fear chilled my veins, and I stood motionless. This irritation did not retire or lessen. It seemed as if some powerful effulgence covered me like a mantle. I opened my eyes and found all about me luminous and glowing. It was the element of heaven that flowed around. Nothing but a fiery stream was at first visible, but anon a shrill voice from behind called upon me to attend. I turned. It is forbidden to describe what I saw. Words, indeed, would be wanting to the task. The lineaments of that being, whose veil was now lifted, and whose visage beamed upon my sight, no hues of pencil or of language can portray. As it spoke, the accents thrilled to my heart. Thy prayers are heard. In proof of thy faith, render me thy wife. This is the victim I choose. Call her hither, and here let her fall. The sound and visage and light vanished at once. So Wieland in his sister's house hears a voice that he interprets as what we can only assume as the voice of God. And it tells him to bring his wife to his sister's house and to kill her. Shouldn't surprise you that since Wieland is on trial that he does exactly that. Not only does he do that, he also executes his children, who I think he has 4 or 5. What's shocking not only is that, but on trial, Wieland has no qualms about telling you this. He's standing up there freely admitting, under no duress, what he does. He turns himself in. He says, I did it. He says, you should let me go. I was directed by God to do this thing. This was a divine mission assigned to me, and I followed through with it. It was very difficult to do. It says in another part that he rejoiced that he was given such a difficult task so that he can prove how faithful, how dedicated he is to God. It's also really important to note that this is based on a real historical event. A murder really did happen where a man killed his wife and all of his children, and that was sort of the inspiration for Brown to write this novel. There is, in the modern library edition, for certain, a reprint of that article. Now, in an earlier version of me recording this, right before I started recording, I read it for the first time. I thought, oh, maybe I should know what this actually says. And I read it, and I will tell you, it was harrowing. I did not expect it to be that. I really didn't. It wasn't graphic, okay, but it was not easy to read. In general, and at least for Christianity in all its varieties that I'm aware of, you're supposed to put God first. Okay, it's whatever God or God's will comes first, then it's everything else after that. Whether that is yourself and your own interests, whether it's your family, whether it's your business, whatever those other interests are, all those things, depending on your life and how you have your life set up, you structure those other things. However, this is calling upon that sort of core tenet of Christianity, right? If God tells you to do it, then you have to do it. And not only that, but you're absolved, right? There's no, even though it is criminal, perhaps according to human law to mortal law, to us, right? If it's even though it's a criminal act, it doesn't matter because you're absolved. It's okay because you were directed to do this by God. That's the sentiment that Wieland is expressing at trial. He says, I did this. You should free me. You're all good Christians. Would you have not obeyed God? Are you saying that you wouldn't listen to God if God told you to do this? So it makes a very interesting approach to a very horrifying concept, where Wieland absolutely knows and believes that God came to him and told him to kill his wife and his children. And he did it. And it was hard. He didn't want to do it, but he did it. And he would do it again. And he feels that he is blessed in a sense that way, that he was given a very hard task and he was able to see it through. And so I read that, and man, that idea stuck with me for a long time. I remember reading this, and at the time, with the job that I worked at, I had a friend who was very Christian, and I told him about this story and about how this happened, and he kind of got upset when talking about this. He didn't like it. It really upset him. All right. And he said, well, this, he even brought up the story of Abraham and how that story in my upbringing too sort of says like, well, we don't have to do these sacrifices anymore. You don't have to sacrifice humans anymore to God. That's how I was taught that story. That was the message of that story. And I understood where he was upset, but I still thought the idea was very interesting because, what would someone who's devoutly Christian do? Would you follow through with this thing? If you felt that God told you to do this horrible, horrifying thing, would you follow through with it? Right? If you definitively thought that this was like undeniably God, would you do it? There's some other context that we need to go through because, of course, chapter 19 suggests that there's 18 other chapters before this in which quite a bit happens. So let's go back to the beginning of the novel. The entirety of the story is told by Clara. It's her sort of like writing down these events because it seems as though someone like you, the reader, or someone has questioned her about it, and she's relating all the events in their entirety, right? Not for some sort of legal body, but just sort of as to explain to someone what happened years later. So she starts talking about the senior Wieland, their father, and how he had lived in England, and he had, I think his parents had passed away, and he goes to live with this merchant, and he lives a very kind of unhappy life, just basically kind of worked to the bone a bit, and just not really much joy in his life until he just happens one day in the work that he's doing to see this book that he's seen many times before, but for some reason had fallen open or was open to a certain page, and a line in this book caught his attention. And the line that he sees open in this book reads, "Seek and you shall find." And that really fires his imagination, or really gets his attention. And so he reads this book. The book is I think it's a history of the Camisards, which were a group of, I think they're French Protestants who were resisting one of the king's efforts to convert them back to Catholicism. And their churches were being burned down, and they were being tortured, trying to be made to convert, and they wouldn't. And the group was known for having visions and speaking in tongues and things like this. The book itself does a lot of referencing of the Bible. The senior Wieland, not having a lot of familiarity with the Bible, uses these references that this book has, and sort of makes conflicting sort of conclusions about it. Clara writes in this chapter 1 that his constructions of the text were hasty and formed in a narrow scale. They're interpreting the Bible, and he's interpreting these interpretations and not really doing an excellent job about it. But he essentially forms his life philosophy based on these slightly misinterpreted ideas. And he feels that it's his duty to essentially crusade, to convert people who do not believe in Christianity to Christianity. And he sees the Native Americans in America as being like his calling, like where he should go. So he does move to America and builds a house and tries to do this. But he really doesn't do very well with it. For some reason that seemed to be out of his control, and maybe just not really understanding, not having the stamina for the task. And also being slightly afraid, because there are many stories about horrible things happening to people who try to do this. He does not have success. He gives up after a while. He feels very ashamed about this. And in fact, it says that he feels a command had been laid upon him, which he had delayed to perform. He felt as if a certain period of hesitation and reluctance had been allowed him, but that this period was past. He was no longer permitted to obey. The duty assigned to him was transferred, in consequence of his disobedience, to another, and all that remained was to endure the penalty. So essentially, he feels as though he is now doomed. There's no fixing it now. It's too late. He even tells his wife he thinks this is going to happen. He was haunted by the belief that a kind of death that awaited him was strange and terrible. His anticipations were thus far vague and indefinite, but that sufficed to poison every moment of his being and devote him to ceaseless anguish. And so he goes on like this for a while. Until one night he comes home and his brother is there, and they're having dinner, and he seems very distracted, and his wife is kind of worried about him. But eventually it comes time for him to go up to his little chapel and pray. He usually goes there, I think, at midnight and does it. It was like a kind of like clockwork. He would go up there. And so she's hoping that he'll feel better. So he goes up there, and she's kind of anxiously watching. They hear what sounds somewhat like a gunshot, and they see like a strange glowing going on up there. She's very worried. She wakes up his brother. He goes up to the hill, sees this cloud sort of hanging about the temple, this little temple that he's built up there. I think it's like an open air sort of little structure. So the light goes out. Then he goes in there, and he finds Wieland on the ground, completely naked. Now, they think at first that he's taken his clothes off, but he hasn't. All the clothes have been burned off of his body, but his hair and his shoes are completely untouched. They take him back home, and he has injuries all over his body, like bruises, like he's been hit. He says that he heard a voice behind him, and that he was struck, and they can sort of tell that he withholds some information. And later that night, he dies. Clara and Theodore, the two sort of main characters for the bulk of the novel, are young children at this time. And their uncle, who they trust and who is a very level-headed person, relates these events to the family later. This is definitely a point of meditation for Clara and Theodore. They think about it a lot, especially Theodore. We're just going to call him Wieland from now on, because that's what the book calls him for the entirety of the rest of the novel. Wieland himself is a very stoic character, very religious, kind of quiet and reserved, very even-tempered, and generally what you would think of as being a kind of mild-mannered, good Christian. Clara, his sister, is also a good Christian. They don't really have any official or sort of formal religious upbringing. Their mother also passes away, so they go to live with their aunt. But they have some money, and they grow up well-educated and taken care of. There's some neighbors nearby. The Plyles, Catherine Plyle, her brother is away in Europe. Our brother Henry is away in Europe. He's a little bit older, I think. But Catherine and Theodore Wieland grow up together. They become very good friends. As they are older, they marry, and they have a large family. I want to say 4 or 5 children. Clara has her own house. She could live with her brother in his house, but she decides she'd kind of like have her own autonomy. So she has her own home separately from him. And they live a very idealized life. They convert their father's temple into sort of a place where they would go and have discussions. Catherine's brother Henry comes back from Europe. He had been interested in marrying this, I want to say baroness, who was over there, but for some slightly convoluted reasons, that doesn't pan out. She's going to marry somebody else, so he comes back home. He and Theodore become great friends. They have many lively discussions. Theodore is very stoic, and I would say you could say very conservative in his beliefs and how he and what he thinks. Henry is much more liberal. He's much more eager to sort of question things and question the status quo and those sort of things. You would think that this would make them antagonistic to each other, but it doesn't. They actually thrive off of each other's opinions, and they have very healthy respect for each other and lots of great discussion and conversation that ultimately is very rewarding for both of them. They both enjoy each other's companies and their diverse opinions. You have Theodore and Clara Wieland, and you have Henry and Catherine Plyle, and they all love to hang around with each other and talk about different things. That's not the religious things are not the only thing they do. They become very interested in the Roman orator Cicero. Now, Cicero, you probably don't know who Cicero is. Maybe you do. I'm going to tell you what I can remember from my research. Cicero was an orator, a public speaker, who spoke out against Caesar and the things that Caesar was doing. He's uniquely idolized as someone who has particularly great public speaking. Now, lawyers at this time would often have busts of Cicero in their office. That was a thing that actually happened, right? And Cicero did some other writings as well. And the obsession, you could say, that Wieland somewhat has about Cicero and the power of speech is cluing you in to some of the themes of the novel. Wieland has this bust of Cicero at this little temple where they have these discussions, and they act out plays and do all kinds of stuff, right? It's a very healthy environment for them to discuss things and read literature and things like that, right? So it sounds great. Now, while this is going on, it's discovered that Wieland is actually, through some interesting things that are going on over in Europe right now, that he has some, like a title, basically, that he can inherit. About the time that this information is found out, Plyle discovers that the woman that he had been interested in Europe, her fiance has passed away or is otherwise out of the picture. And that he wants to go back to Europe to live and marry this woman. He's very interested in her. He was very in love with her. But he wants to take his family with him. Plyle is trying to convince Wieland to go over there. He's saying, you have these very devout and strong Christian views, and the people of this country would really accept them. You would find them very, very, very much enamored with those views and very much on board, so to speak, with it. It's a beautiful country, and there's lots of different ways. And you would be wealthy, right? You could essentially just, be the lord of this area and just relax and and focus on like religious studies and things like that, and which would be appealing to Wieland. And you would have this great life. You wouldn't have to do very much, and you would just have this beautiful country to live in. It would be wonderful. And Wieland isn't convinced. He doesn't want to go. He says, "Why would I want to do that?" He basically comes up with all these reasons to refute it. These people, they could govern themselves. They don't need me. Why is one thing better than another? I don't really care about the wealth. He essentially, it's very much like, you could go live this life of luxury, and Wieland has no interest in it. Not because he doesn't think it will work, but because he wants to stay where he's at. He doesn't feel like he sort of rejects these worldly gains, which I think says a lot about the character of Wieland, that he wants to stay in America with his family where they're happy. He doesn't care about this worldly stuff and all these attractive things that he could just go get. He doesn't even really have to work for it. He could just have it. And he denies. He says, I don't want to do that. Which kind of bums Plyle out, because he was hoping he could convince him with this. And he's tried a few times, but it doesn't work. Wieland gets a letter from someone in Europe. Wieland or Plyle gets a letter from someone in Europe. So they're at this little retreat where they have this bust of Cicero, and they're reading the letter, but then it begins to rain. And so they go back down to the house, only to realize that they forgot the letter up there, and that somebody was asking, like, oh, what did the letter say? Did it say this or that? I don't remember. I left it up there. Let me go get it. And when he comes back far too early. And his sister notices that he's far too early, and she notices he's sort of has a strange look on his face, and he acts strange. And he sits down, he doesn't say anything like they sort of expected him to, but there's still sort of a conversation going on. So the conversation continues, and it sort of comes to a natural halt, and they kind of wait, and they think, okay, now Wieland is going to say something, but he doesn't. So finally they ask Wieland if he has the letter, and he says no. And he questions them as to whether his wife has left and come back. And he says that he heard his wife call him from the bottom of the hill and tell him to stop, to not get the letter, to come back, which he did, expecting to meet her at the bottom of the hill, but she wasn't there. And then he gets back in the house, and she's here, and they're telling him that she never moved or never said a word. And nobody knows what to think about this. But Wieland says, I'm certain that was Catherine's voice. That was my wife's voice that I heard. I know it. Plyle and Wieland, on a separate day, go for a walk, and they come back very late, and they're acting strange. Both Wieland and Plyle are very quiet. Eventually they drag out of them that on this walk they heard Catherine's voice again, and that she told them Plyle's interest, the woman that he's interested in Europe, is dead, that there's no reason to go to Europe, and that he shouldn't leave, and he can stop trying to convince his friend Wieland. And they even sort of question the voice a little bit, and it answers just a little. They don't really know what to think about it. A couple days later, Plyle gets a letter from Europe confirming just that this woman that he was interested in is dead. And he feels pretty bummed out. At some point, a woman and her child have come to live with the Wielands. She is on the run from someone, but they're not really sure who. But they take her in. Clara just absolutely loves her daughter, and they raise her daughter just as much as they do any of the Wieland children. So she has all the benefits of education and everything else. After a few years, the mother passes away. Plyle meets someone in town, and he sort of becomes friends with them, and he's sort of showing around. He's sort of like he works for the military in some ways, a military officer of some sort. Plyle at some point brings him over to Wieland's house. He says, "Oh, this is my friend," and the man sees this young girl whose mother is dead now, that they've been raising as their own child, and with all the benefits, and he basically says, "This is my daughter." Like, how? And they sort of tell the story, and he says, well, a few years ago, I came home after a long tour and found that my wife was gone, and she had left a few days, just a day or two before I got there. No one knows where she went. Nobody even knew that she had left, and I never did find out what happened to them. And so it's a real mystery as to why his wife ran off, but this is his daughter. He says, well, I still have more like military responsibilities I have to take care of. So I do want to take my daughter home with me, but I still have to take care of this. So in a few months, I'll be done, and I'll come back, and we'll go and live together. Not long after this, Clara encounters someone on her walks named Carwin. And he has a sort of more rustic appearance as far as his clothing goes, but he appears young and handsome. Clara is very struck by his voice, which she thinks is very mesmerizing and very interesting, and finds him attractive. And his manner of speech, very formal, and it sort of really captures her imagination. She's really interested in this person, right? To the point where she thinks she even like draws a picture of him. They sort of befriend this man whose name is Carwin, And he sort of joins them in these sort of discussions they have. So now it's 5 that would come and have these discussions. And they bring up to Carwin these strange voices that they'd heard. You guys have got some weird stuff going on here, but he's also similar to Wieland, slightly stoic, right? Slightly very level-headed. So he fits in well, and they all seem to like Carwin as well. And then it begins to get very strange. Late at night, Clara hears 2 voices in her closet in her home talking, and they seem to be plotting a murder. She's listening to them, one voice saying we should murder this person, and the other voice saying, no, I don't know if we really need to murder this person or not. And she becomes very scared, and it sounds as though they are in her closet, like talking quietly, but she can hear them, as though they didn't expect her to be awake. She gets up and runs from the house. She runs to her brother's house and faints in front of his door. The family are woken up by a voice in their house saying, wake up, a person that you care very much about, a member of your family that you love is outside and they need help. Of course, they're all very freaked out at this point by these voices, right? This stuff is really creepy. And I really like this part of the book. I like this part of the book especially. How is this voice coming about? Is this some sort of spirit or what? This works especially hard on Wieland, who meditates a lot on what happened to his father. And this voice is sort of predicting things that prove to be true. Clara is, of course, getting very stressed out, right? Especially these people, like there's seemingly something in her closet. People were in her closet, or voices at least were in her closet. Whatever these voices are, plotting her death. Clara does have one more, I believe it's only one more encounter with these voices where she's outside and she hears one of these voices tell her it's one of the 2 voices that was planning to kill her, but it was the voice arguing against killing her, that she should, in the spot that she's in right now, she should not come back, that every place else is safe, but don't come back to this spot or the killer will find you. But if you stay away, if you don't come back here, you'll be fine. She doesn't tell anybody about that particular instance. She doesn't tell her brother. I don't remember if it's to spare him or if she doesn't know what to think about that. We learn that Clara has been interested in Plyle for a while, but has been unwilling to vocalize it. She feels that she should not come forward and tell Plyle how she feels, that he must come to her, that only after he reveals his feelings for her, which she feels are real and that he does have, that can she reveal her feelings to him. And I did find this a bit exasperating, where she can't tell him, and it was kind of like, okay. It wasn't that went on real long, but it did it was sort of like, oh, I can't tell him, and I was kind of like, okay, sure. It was like old romance novel type stuff, I thought. Now, Clara's in her room again late at night, still remembering this thing from the closet, still a little freaked out, and she hears a noise. And she knows that someone's in her closet. And so she very bravely tries to open the closet door, but it won't open. Someone's holding it. And she hears a voice. The person here is going to do horrible things to you, right? And they're an assassin and all this other stuff, and leaves them alone and stay away. But she's like, no, still like, I'm not going to live in fear. And it's Carwin in the closet. And he says, I was going to assault you, okay? I was going to attack you and assault you. But this voice rebuked me, and I feel bad for it and ashamed now. Please forgive me. I'm going to leave. She gets very angry and is also afraid at the same time, because this man is literally hiding in the closet of her house. She hears him leave the house, but she stays in her room. And then it's not long after that she sees someone outside, I guess in the gloom, so to speak, come in. She hears someone come back into the house, and she thinks that Carwin has come back in the house. Right? And she hears this person come up the steps and go into the other room and close the door in the other room. And now she's really freaked out, because she's like, I should have gone downstairs and locked the door. Now I can't leave. If I leave, that whoever's, Carwin is in the other room, he's going to hear me. He's going to attack me when I come out of here. But it turns out it's not Carwin, it's Plyle. And he starts to sort of like berate her and says, I know what's been going on with you and Carwin. It's despicable. I thought you were a good person, but you're a terrible person. I can't believe you would do these things. And it just goes off at her, and she's like, again, I'm a little exasperated because she can't seem to defend herself. And I guess in this moment, I can understand it. I can kind of understand it, because she just went through something extremely stressful, right? Where she said, literally, someone told her, I was going to assault you, but I was reprimanded by these weird voices, and so I'm not doing it now. And then also, this is coming out of nowhere for Plyle, who she had a lot of feelings for, and so I can see that the sort of storm of emotions that she's been going through has probably left her exhausted and maybe not the most capable of defending herself. She does try, but doesn't do a very good job. Plial's like, I'm done with this. You know what? I'm going to go to Europe. I'm just sort of done. I'm done with this place. I'm done with all this stuff that's going on. You and him can be happy. Whatever you're going to do. I don't even know. I couldn't believe that a person like you would do these things with him. He throws a little temper tantrum, I guess, and she doesn't really know why. He seems to have information about her that she just doesn't understand. And so he leaves and she's very distraught. I believe it's the next day. She goes to Plial's house. And I was thinking, this is like one of those scenarios where like a little bit of basic conversation could probably resolve this. Well, they do talk, right? She does go in to Plial's house and they do talk. Plial lives in the city. Or on the other side of town or something like that. So she goes there and they do talk. Essentially, Plial monologues to her. She just, again, is not really either is too angry by the fact that she's being accused of things that she's not entirely clear what they are, but she feels that Plial should know her and know her character well enough. They've been around each other for 6 or 7 years now, that he should know her well enough that she's not like whatever it is he's accusing her of, that she's not that way. Right? And she feels like she shouldn't have to defend herself. And also doesn't even understand what she's being accused of. It's not really even clear what Plial thinks happened or why he thinks this or where this information exactly came from. So this whole thing, which I really feel is just like him just monologuing to her and her not really defending very well, does not end well. So she goes, but I think she faints or gets so stressed out that she just sort of passes out. And he sort of makes sure that she's okay. And, feels sorry for her. You can tell that there's a genuine emotion there. But she reawakens and she sees this. And he sort of says, you can just admit to me what happened and I'm not going to be upset. The impression being that sort of if you'll say that you're sorry for what you've been doing and what you've done, then I can forgive you. And maybe we can move past this, is kind of what he says. That sounds a little arrogant. I guess it is kind of arrogant what happens. It isn't quite stated that way, though. But this is pretty close. And she's kind of like, hell no, I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. But again, she just can't seem to articulate to him, are you going to wake up for a second and know that I didn't do this? What are you even accusing me of? Please tell me exactly what it is. But she just never does that. Or it doesn't ever become clear what he thinks, why he thinks it, and why he's so certain, even though he knows her and has known her. So after she has this talk with Plial that does not end well, she gets a note, and it's from Carwin. And Carwin wants to talk to her. He says, I need to explain what's going on. I'm going to meet you at your house, right about dark or right after dark, and I want to explain everything. He says, you don't have to forgive me or anything else. I just want to explain what's going on. If you'll just give me the chance, I'll explain. She's very angry, and she's like, why would I agree to this? This guy literally said he was going to assault me. But I think she sort of works it over. She goes to her brother's house for sure and says, I'm going to spend the night here. And then sort of kind of goes about her day. And then isn't really sure, and she decides, maybe I will go over there. So Clara finally does go home. It's a little bit later than her meeting was sort of scheduled by Carwin to meet. And this is a very confusing section right here. So she gets home. Going into the home, it's dark. She doesn't think Carwin is there, but she hears a voice, it's a very commanding voice. Another one of these voices tell her to stop. In the process of telling her to stop, she looks a certain direction. Maybe because she sees movement or she sees something, and she sees Carwin, and he has a very shocked look in his face. He runs away. She finds her dead sister-in-law in her house, and she absolutely has a bit of a breakdown. When she wakes up, these people are telling her that that she's dead. Her brother is being questioned, but they don't really say why he's being questioned. They're just kind of vague about that. And that the children are under the care of a certain woman. And they really kind of dance around it for a long time. She even says, I think it was, you need to find Carwin. They're like, we don't know what happened to Carwin, but we have the killer. And they're like, she's like, you do? Who was it? And they're like, your brother. And it was Wieland. And she's like, what? And Clara keeps asking after the children, saying, I can take care of them. And they dance around it for a long time until they finally say, well, this woman who we say is watching the children is really watching over their bodies. And and after that, Clara really just kind of goes out of it for a long time. She just kind of is not really able to function, right? She's so overcome with grief. Maybe around a week, maybe a little less than that. Clara discovers that Plial has been coming to visit her, but his visits are very platonic. Her uncle is really pushing for her to go back to Europe. She can't understand why. Finally, she says, okay, fine. I'll go back to Europe. I got nothing going on here anymore. I guess I will go. She says, before I go, I want to see Wieland one more time. And her uncle says, well, you can't do that. And she sort of questions him, why can't I go see my brother? And he says, we can't talk to him about it. Like, he's already done it. He's going to be punished. But he did it because he thought it was the right thing to do. The thing that he did, he says, is extremely hard for him to do because of how much he cares for his family. But he was trying to put God first. And if you go and take that away from him, then he's a murderer of his own family, right? And he was tricked, and that would just crush him. And she's like, oh. And she sort of says, okay, I get it. Well, then I'd just like to go and see him. And her uncle gets kind of quiet, and she's like, well, can I go see him? And he's like, well, okay, I have been withholding something from you. The truth is that your brother has escaped from prison a few times while you've been sort of out of it. He broke into Plial's house and tried to strangle him in his bed, but Plial was able to jump out the window and save himself. When we found him, he was hiding in your house, waiting for you to come home. It's happened more than once. And this is what's crazy. It's like, what is Wieland doing to get out of this? It's like, at some point they put him in chains, and he still is like, these chains can't hold me. Like, he's getting out. He's like, he's crazy. I don't understand what Wieland has got going on at this point, but it's like he's almost got like divine intervention setting him free. Right? We never find out how this happens, but Wieland is like able to get out. Like, this cage can't hold me. And her uncle's like, you need to go to Europe. You need to get out of the country because honestly, he doesn't know that you're staying with me right now. But if he finds out, or when he guesses, or figures out where you are, like, it could happen at any moment. And I don't know. I don't want you to be hurt. He was going to try and kill you. He's trying to kill Plial. He feels that he's being directed to kill Plial. He feels like he's being directed to kill you. So Clara says, okay, I will go to Europe. I'll go tomorrow. They have a thing booked for the next day. But she decides she wants to go get her journal from her room. And there's some ties, and I won't go into all the reasons, but there was some stuff in the journal, and she wanted to get her journal. So she does kind of make this little, well, I'm just going to go out for a minute, and sort of like sneaks off and sneaks back to her house and gets her journal, and then kind of lingers there for a while, I guess kind of like thinking about all the horrible things that have happened and how her life has been flipped upside down, and this wonderful time that she had in her life is now completely over and ruined, and everyone that she loves is gone. And she's not even going to get to be here anymore. And she decides that she probably wants to kill herself. And about this time, she hears someone coming in the house. And it's Carwin. Carwin has been gone this whole time, he tells her. He knew about Catherine's death. He acts like he doesn't know about the children's death, and he can't believe that it was Wieland that did it. And he says, and she sort of says, well, this is your fault. You need to turn yourself in. And he's like, hold on. He's like, I'm going to tell you some things, but I didn't know anything about this, and I promise you I did nothing to your brother. I had no influence on your brother. Carwin has a almost supernatural ability at ventriloquism. So he can like expertly imitate anybody's voice, and he can throw his voice like exceptionally well, almost superhumanly well. He would sort of take late night walks, and he would walk in an area kind of by that little temple. I think he had snuck up there and was looking at this letter during the rain, and they were coming up, and so he threw Catherine's voice at the bottom of the hill to keep Wieland away so it wouldn't be discovered. And he overheard Wieland and Plial talking on their walk and surmised that the Countess, or whatever that Plial was interested in, was probably dead, and so he sort of imitated Catherine's voice again to do this. He also admits that Clara's housemaid was also a prostitute, and he's been sleeping with her at Clara's house. And that her housemaid had talked up Clara quite great, and saying how brave and intelligent Clara was. And so Carwin, sort of intending to test this, did this little stunt by throwing the voices in the closet. I think he like sticks his head. There's like a window in the closet. And he sticks his head through the window in the closet from outside or something. And the idea being, with these two voices that she heard plotting to kill her, were supposed to be plotting to kill the housemaid. But Clara got too freaked out too early and left. He didn't, he was like, okay, he didn't expect that. And then he ran and followed her, and she fainted. He throws his voice through the keyhole and to wake the family up, to have them come check on her. And then to explain being discovered in the closet, sort of in a spur of the moment, not knowing, not expecting to be discovered. He was interested in Clara. He found her interesting. I guess he was sort of spying on her. So, sort of in the spur of the moment, he came up with this story that didn't work very well, as though he was really a devious person, but that he heard these voices, and these voices sort of made him repent. And he was hoping it was going to play out a little different, but it didn't. And then when he left, he doesn't like Plio very much. Essentially, made it seem as though Plio was overhearing a conversation he shouldn't, and that they've been sleeping together and a bunch of other stuff and all this other stuff, and that they were breaking up. And he thought that like Plio would go to Clara, and that he would obviously see it was some sort of a prank, and they wouldn't believe it. Basically, all of these voices are Carwin doing these sort of like spur of the moment, very selfish, very ridiculous little things. Carwin has some backstory when he was in England, I believe, but it might have been Ireland. He discovered he had this ability to throw his voice that he was exceptionally good at, and that he used it for sometimes nefarious purposes. And he felt that not really intending to, but that somebody manipulated him into doing these things, and that he did, and now he feels a lot of remorse for it, and so he sort of escaped to America to sort of get away for the repercussions. Carwin's explanations are kind of, they seem a little bit contrived, right? It does feel like it was so random, and in fact, that's really it. It's like all this stuff meant nothing to him. There was really never any significant thing that he was trying to gain. He wasn't really trying to manipulate anyone. He plays the trick on Clara just because he wanted to test her to see if she really was that courageous. He does the thing where he pretends that he and Clara are together to trick Plio, just to be kind of like petty and slightly malicious, but not really necessarily mean. Carwin says that he didn't say anything to Wieland, that he never told Wieland to murder his wife and his family. He's actually surprised by it. And then he explains how he had come to Clara's house to talk and tell her all these things that he just told her. But when he got there, he found Catherine's dead body and freaked out. When Clara came into the house, he tried to stop her so she wouldn't see the body, right? Also realizing that it's going to appear that he was the murderer. But when he sort of told her to stop, using that voice, she happened to look in his direction, and he essentially freaked out and ran off. So Carwin is just kind of like such a lame person, right? Like a horrible person, and also like such a petty little. It's just terrible, right? But he says he didn't do this horrible thing. He didn't convince Wieland. He didn't try to sway Wieland at all to do this thing to his wife. Clara is obviously extremely mad. She doesn't really believe him. Basically thinks, yes, you did. You're probably just lying to me. You've lied about all this other stuff. Why would you start telling the truth now, right? You're hoping that no one finds out the things that you've done. They hear the sound of someone else entering the house downstairs. And who should appear but Wieland himself, having escaped from prison again. His clothes are in tatters, and he has a crazy, sort of wild look in his eye, a look of extreme intensity. Clara, knowing what her uncle told her, Wieland feels that he's being directed to kill her, and to kill Plio too if he can find him. Gets him to stop for a second and to listen to her. Carwin is the voice that you heard. He imitated your wife at the bottom of the hill to call you back from getting the letter. He was the person that you and Plio heard say that this woman in Europe was dead. He's probably the reason that you thought that you were being directed to kill your family. Wieland, very intensely, asked Carwin if this is true, and Carwin is such a lame duck. He's like can't really even speak. He's like, and Wieland is just so disgusted with him. He's like, just get out of here, just leave. And then he says something that I think is really crazy. So after hearing this, Wieland gets quiet and he thinks about it for a minute, and he finally says that it really doesn't matter. God manipulated Carwin into getting Wieland to do this thing, and that was still a message directly from God, that he was still getting this. And I love how, I don't know if I love it, but it's insane to see, Wieland double down on it. He's like, nope, it still was. You were being controlled by God to make me do this, which is just nuts. There's a brief exchange after Carwin leaves where Wieland and Clara talk. Eventually it comes down to, well, I'm going to go ahead and kill you. You have 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, I'm going to kill you. Which is a weird thing. Clara sees Carwin sort of creep back in behind Wieland, and she sort of says, why can't you help me, or something like that, and use your powers to help me. And then Carwin leaves and she feels a lot of despair because she thought maybe Carwin was going to do something to help. But Wieland doesn't react. Now, I guess you could assume that Wieland didn't hear Carwin because Carwin was being quiet, and that he thinks that Clara is sort of talking to God, maybe, or sort of like offering up, as this is sort of a prayer, or like her last words in a sense, or it could be also that he's just so focused on what time it is and watching the clock that he just like pushes everything else out of his head. I can only say that Wieland is so out of it at this point. He's literally described as being completely transformed, right? He's not at all like the Wieland that Clara ever knew. Carwin does sneak off. He does use the voice one more time and tells Wieland to stop, to not do it. I mean, that he needs to repent, essentially. And this seems to have an effect on Wieland, as though he didn't really understand what Clara tried to tell him earlier about Carwin's influence, and he feels that this is actually a divine voice talking to him. And ultimately, he picks up a knife that's in the room and kills himself. And Clara sort of falls into this deep depression. She's unable to do anything or act. Carwin does go back to town, and he gets her uncle, and the uncle comes back there. That ends this chapter, which is the second to last chapter, sort of saying, like, you know, I hope I die soon. You know, this has been a record of our events. You know, life is horrible, and I just want it to end. So after that, we get a final chapter where Claire refuses to leave her house. She just wants to stay there until one night where there's a house fire and the whole house burns down. But Clara is saved. She does not die. Clara agrees and moves to Europe with her uncle. Plial's wife, who he went to marry, this European woman, actually was not dead. She was like in some weird hiding or something like that, because something, I can't remember what the explanation was, but she's not dead. They do marry. They're married for time, and then she dies. And then Plial and Clara marry. She does bring back up the man whose daughter Wieland's had adopted. And we get the backstory on that, in which he was away in service, and another man was interested in his wife and tried to convince her to sleep with him, but she really wouldn't. But in the process of doing it, he basically sort of lies to her and acts like he really cares about her. She feels very strongly for this other man, but she won't sleep with him. And as a result of her guilt, when she hears her husband's coming back, she takes her daughter and runs away because she's so overcome with guilt. The sort of last thing that the novel says is about this sort of like that little side story with this guy and his wife, and she ran away, is how this outside force was influencing them, influencing the wife, and if she had just stayed fast and not listened to his words, that they would have had no power over her. And that's definitely a theme in the book, that how these words can have such power over people. It is kind of disappointing when we find out that these voices that people are hearing are just Carwin being a dipshit. It's like he has nothing to even gain, right? It's simply a pointless, petty, silly little act, right? He's just sort of like a practical joke that goes terribly wrong, and he doesn't do anything to correct. Almost all these things that these characters do are sort of like interpreting something, but sort of failing to interpret it correctly. It's something they interpret completely on their own. They don't consult anyone with. They don't sort of debate it and talk about it. The characters who would go to this temple where their father had this bust of Cicero, and they would, debate certain things and be very open and listen to each other. All those sort of lessons sort of get lost or forgotten when these events start to happen. They start to say, well, these are unquestionable things, right? Wieland doesn't look at hearing his wife's disembodied voice as being, maybe untrustworthy. Plial doesn't take what he knows about Clara and apply it to the things that he seems to overhear. And of course, Wieland, who's extremely religious, who's already sort of been primed by these earlier voices that he's heard, and also to have this family history in which he feels that his father had a calling, although not necessarily a voice, but had a calling that he ignored and was punished for it. Feels that he needs to do something, feels that he is really being told. There's evidence in his past, as far as he's concerned, that failing to recognize a direct message from God will be punished, and that the right thing to do is to follow God's will. If you're directed by God to do this thing, even though it seems terrible, to do it. But I think it really comes down to showing how easily people are manipulated by language. Everyone in this book shouldn't trust these voices that they hear. Wieland knows that it's not his wife who spoke to him, even though he hears her voice and he says it was your voice, despite all of the sort of proof that there's untrustworthy, right? That this is something weird. And then when, of course, he gets this voice telling him, whether it's from himself or whether it's from an outside influence, that he trusts it. He does struggle with doing it. It's not like he's just like, okay, he just goes there. He does have a real internal struggle. He takes his wife to the house, kind of like is like, I don't know, and then she's like, well, we should go, and he's kind of upset because I guess he's mad because he doesn't feel like he can do it, and then he also doesn't want to do it, but he feels that he's supposed to do it, he needs to do it. What I think is really kind of strange, almost creepy aspect to after he kills his wife, he looks at her and he says, "This isn't my wife. She doesn't look like this," and he is almost a feeling like she's not really his wife, like she was like some sort of devil or something put in her place. He has this moment where he thinks that. Then he feels remorse, but you have to feel like there's this like real psychotic moment. He starts to like essentially create a narrative that fits in with what he's doing. It fits in with what he was told. Really interesting. It says a lot about how vulnerable we are to speech, how speech itself, the pen is mightier than the sword, how speech is so strong and I can do so much, and we can do things that we would never do otherwise because of something like a mantra that we have. The senior Wieland, this mantra that he has that ultimately leads him down the path of some sort of like spontaneous combustion type assault that he gets. Or Wieland, who kills the people and the things in his life that are most valuable to him, his family. This thing that he had that's more valuable than anything else, he destroys that because he thinks he's being directed to do it by God, and he doesn't question it. He just accepts it unquestioningly. And I guess what Brown is really saying there is that you really shouldn't accept anything unquestioned. It was interesting to hear Wieland sort of double down for a little while. He may be an agent of Satan, but that message was directed to me by God. And that to me was just like, damn. It really kind of was like, that doubling down really kind of, I was very surprised by that. And I think there are a number of times in this novel where I was surprised by how events went. I like how Brown sort of supports the sort of theme that he's going after in the end of the novel, even if it's a little bit unsatisfying. But I enjoy also the sort of the way things are up to that point where we find out the truth, where we start to realize that it's a person doing this, that we're being tricked, that it's not really supernatural, right? There's that moment early in the book, that first moment where they first hear voices that I just think is so weird, right? It's such a weird moment when it's like, this is my wife's voice telling me not to do this thing. I don't know why. It seemed as though I was in danger if I went up this hill, but I don't know why. There's no chance, it doesn't seem to him, that he could be tricked. None of them know anything about someone being able to imitate a voice so successfully, or ventriloquism, so these things never occur to them. In fact, the book never even uses that word. Carwin doesn't even know the name for the thing that he can do. He just knows that he's able to have this sort of talent to do this thing, that anybody could do it, but he's just really great at it. And has used it for nefarious purposes in the past and feels sort of bad about it. But not bad enough not to keep doing it, apparently. But I really like how in those moments you're not really sure. There's this big question of what could this stuff be? What is this? What's going on? These are certainly not official interpretations, and they're not Brown's intention, but I like to think about the other possibilities as though they still sort of exist. I like to think about these voices like in some sort of like superposition, if you'll bear with me for a minute. You could even still argue in a sense that Wieland was being spoken to directly by God or something, right? If he's hearing voices, then wouldn't Wieland himself be able to argue, well, then I was made to hear those voices by God, right? Not that I'm excited about the fact that he does those things because it's horrible, but it's just it's a very interesting question, and I don't like it to just being like, well, this person just was not altogether sane. If Wieland really was getting a communication that from God, from a divine force that tells him to kill his family, is he being used as an example? Is he doing this thing? Is he sort of like a sacrificial lamb in a sense to say, here's an example of why you should not always do things unquestionably, right? You should question when you're asked to do something that seems wrong in every other way. If it seems wrong, it may actually be wrong, right? You don't just find a way to justify it, really evaluate it. I kind of forgot to mention that it always seems like these weird mental breaks that these people have always seem to be related to something like spending time in the wilderness, because the senior Wieland, when he comes home after a long trip through the woods, and that had an influence. Of course, junior Wieland has this vision after he goes through this sort of nighttime forest on the way to his sister's house, and he sort of says out loud, God, I would love to be tested. He actually does say that in the chapter 19. Right before he goes into the house, Clara sort of sitting outside and has this voice tell her, don't come back to this spot. This spot is dangerous. So there's definitely a connection. I don't know what I don't really know where that goes. I just noticed it. Don't know if you're going to read it. Hopefully that lengthy synopsis that I gave is tolerable. If you're interested in Wieland, there are audio formats I noticed on YouTube for free. There are audio formats that you can buy through Audible that are well done. There are e-formats that are free. So I think there's LibriVox also, and there's Project Gutenberg. If you think about buying a copy of the book, I think the Modern Library edition that has Wieland, it also has that news excerpt, and it also has a couple of fragments that Brown wrote. I think he went on much later and wrote a fragment about Carwin, but I have not read it. If you're going to buy a physical copy, that's the one I'd recommend. If you're going to buy an e-copy for like an e-reader, that's the one I'd recommend. I did mention that there's, in the Modern Library edition, and probably available online, that there's an account of that murder that this is based on. I tried to read it, to recount it in an earlier recording, and I couldn't do it. I really did try, and I got halfway through and I thought, do I want to do this? This literally stopped, and I don't want to do this. I don't want to read this. I don't like it. It's very unpleasant. I think it's kind of harrowing. It's not very gory. But something interesting that I didn't research, so I can't say for sure that it's true or not, but it might be worth your time to look into, is that in that account, the person who committed the murders is sort of like has like some testimony or talks about what happened, and he says that he had two angels appear on either shoulder or on either side of him, and the angel on the left counseled him to destroy the Bible and destroy all idols, which ultimately means his entire family and everything he cares about. And the other angel counseled him not to, but he listens to the angel on the left. And I'm not certain if this is the source of the good angel, bad angel type thing that we see a lot in cartoons and movies and stuff like that. I don't know if that's the source of that, but this is like an account from 1796, so it's pretty old. It might be the first. I don't know. But that's definitely a thing that this man had. I wish I could tell you right now, but I'm not going to research it because this video is already too damn long. For a book that you're not going to read, I hope that my recounting of the story is like at least more than 95% accurate. I really appreciate if you stuck around this long. This was very long-winded, but I really like this story. I just really struggled with how I wanted to present it. And, there was some stuff going on in life with the family, with my wife, where she was super ill and in the hospital for a very long time. And she came home, and I just didn't feel like I didn't read and didn't do very much at all. So she's home, doing much better, thankfully. It's a long road to recovery. Also, I am reading Ramsey Campbell's Midnight Sun. This was recommended to me last year when I did a video on Hungry Moon. This is really good, and I really like it. Hopefully, I'll have something on this soon. Do I have it right here? Look at that. I have it right here. I didn't even know I had it. Rereading The Voyage to Arcturus, so I can do a video. This one needs a little more careful reading for me to do something. I liked it. It's cool. It's crazy in a really good way. But I think to me, I feel like it deserves me to spend a little more time with it. And at some point in reading it the first time, I thought, I'm not taking any more notes. Too much is happening, and I got too many thoughts. There was this moment earlier in the book, I'm like, what is this book doing? Is this book going to be a certain way? I don't know. And then the book was like, oh, no, you were wrong. It's not like that at all. Watch this. And I was like, oh, my God. You win. I'm reading this book. Both of those are fantastic recommendations. I'm really excited. And thank you to the people who recommended them. Thanks very much for watching. My name is Virgil. This is Literally Books. Consider liking and subscribing if you made it this far. If you made it this far, You must have seen something you say thought was okay. Most of it's kind of like this. That's it. Bye.